The train whistle pierced the autumn air as it pulled into Redding, California, bringing with it dust, smoke, and Tabitha Rose, a woman with dreams as vast as the western landscape, and a past that had left her with a pronounced limp in her right leg. Clutching her single valise and the letter from Thomas Yeardley, the man she was to marry, Tabitha, descended carefully from the train, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of her uneven steps on the wooden platform. The year was 1873, and the West was still wild, a place where a woman's options were limited, especially for someone like Tabitha. At 22, with no family and a physical impairment that made potential suitors in Boston look away, she had answered Thomas Yeardley's advertisement for a bride, a cattle rancher in need of a wife. His words had seemed honest, his promises modest but sincere. Now, as she scanned the busy platform for a man whose face she knew only from a small, faded photograph, she wondered if she had made the right choice. "Miss Rose?" The deep voice came from behind her, causing Tabitha to turn too quickly. She stumbled slightly, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady herself. Strong, calloused fingers caught hers, and she looked up into the face of a man who could only be Thomas Yeardley. His features matched the photograph, but they were weathered by sun and wind in a way the picture couldn't capture. His eyes, a clear blue like a summer sky, were focused intently on her face, not on her leg as so many others did when they first met her. "Mr. Yeardley," she acknowledged, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks as she straightened herself, conscious of her limp as she took a step back. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. His clothes were practical, a cotton shirt, worn denim pants, and a wide-brimmed hat that he now removed, revealing dark hair touched with hints of gray at the temples, despite him appearing to be only in his early 30s. "Thomas, please," he corrected with a gentle smile. Then, noticing her struggle with the valise, he reached for it. "May I?" She relinquished it with a nod, grateful for the assistance, but wary of appearing too dependent. "I can manage," she said, perhaps too hastily. "I'm quite capable, Mr. Yeardley. Thomas." His smile deepened, creating lines at the corners of his eyes. "I don't doubt that, Miss Rose. But out here, we help each other. That's how we survive." As they began to walk toward his wagon, Tabitha's limp became more pronounced with fatigue from the long journey. Thomas slowed his pace, matching hers step for step. "I'll walk slow beside you always," he said quietly, without a hint of pity in his voice, just a simple, matter-of-fact statement. Tabitha stopped, surprised by the unexpected kindness in his words. "You needn't coddle me," she said, her tone sharper than intended. Years of dealing with sympathetic looks and whispered comments had built a defensive wall around her heart. "It's not coddling," Thomas replied, looking her directly in the eyes. "It's respect. And maybe a bit of selfishness, too. I'd like to get to know the woman who's agreed to share her life with a stranger based on nothing but a letter and a promise." The honesty in his words disarmed her, and for the first time since stepping off the train, Tabitha felt a glimmer of hope. The wagon ride to Thomas's ranch gave Tabitha time to take in her new surroundings. Redding was still a small settlement, a frontier town with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and other businesses necessary for a growing community. Beyond the town, the landscape opened up into rolling hills and valleys, with the distant outline of mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. "What made you answer my advertisement?" Thomas asked after they had traveled a few miles in comfortable silence. Tabitha considered her response carefully. "I suppose I was looking for a fresh start. Boston held too many memories, and not all of them pleasant." She glanced at him. "And you? Why seek a bride through an advertisement?" Thomas kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "Loneliness, partly, and practicality. A ranch needs more than one pair of hands to thrive, and I wanted a partnership, not just hired help." "And you weren't concerned about—" Tabitha gestured toward her leg. "You mentioned it in your letter," Thomas said simply. "But a person is more than their limitations. My father used to say that character is revealed in how we face our challenges, not in the challenges themselves. Tabitha was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Thomas replied, a hint of sadness in his voice. He and my mother both died of influenza 5 years ago, left me the ranch. It's been just me since then, except for a few hands who help with the cattle. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a modest house with a porch spanning its front, a large barn, several corrals, and outbuildings. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid and well-maintained, a testament to Thomas's hard work. It's not much, he said, a note of apology in his voice, but it's home. It's beautiful, Tabitha said sincerely, seeing not just the buildings, but the potential for a life she had never dared to imagine. As Thomas helped her down from the wagon, she became acutely aware of the reality of her situation. She was to marry this man, a virtual stranger, and make a life with him in this remote place. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. We'll have a room ready for you, Thomas said, seeming to sense her thoughts. The wedding? Well, that's up to you. I know we agreed in our letters, but now that you're here, I want you to be sure. Take the time you need. Relief washed over Tabitha. Thank you, she whispered. The house was simple but comfortable, with a large kitchen, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and 3 bedrooms. Thomas showed her to what would be her room, a space with a bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern hills. I'll leave you to settle in, he said, placing her valise by the bed. Supper will be ready in about an hour. Mrs. Whitaker, who helps around the house, has prepared something special for your arrival. Left alone, Tabitha sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the pattern of the quilt. She had come to the West seeking a new beginning, but now that she was here, doubts crept in. Could she truly be a rancher's wife? Would Thomas eventually regret choosing a bride with a physical impairment? And most pressing of all, could 2 strangers build a life together based on practicality rather than love? As the weeks passed, Tabitha and Thomas settled into a routine. She took over the management of the house, learning from Mrs. Whitaker, a widow who came in 3 times a week. Thomas worked with his cattle, preparing for the upcoming winter. They shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing pieces of themselves to each other. Tabitha learned that Thomas had fought briefly in the Civil War before returning home to help his ailing father with the ranch. He discovered that she had been a schoolteacher in Boston until an accident involving a runaway carriage had left her with her permanent limp. Do you miss teaching? Thomas asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I do, Tabitha admitted. I loved seeing the children's faces light up when they understood something new. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Reading is growing. They'll need more teachers soon. Perhaps if you're interested. The offer touched her deeply. He wasn't just thinking of her as a helpmate for his ranch. He was considering her dreams and aspirations. One crisp November morning, Tabitha was kneading dough in the kitchen when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Thomas dismounting from his horse, his movements urgent. A moment later, he burst through the door. One of the calves is stuck in the creek bed, he explained breathlessly. The hands are all out checking the north pasture. I need help. Without hesitation, Tabitha wiped her hands on her apron. What can I do? They hurried to the creek, where a young calf had indeed become trapped in the mud, bleeding pitifully. Its mother stood nearby, distressed by her offspring's predicament. I need to get in there, Thomas said, already removing his boots. But someone needs to keep the mother calm. She's frightened and might charge. Tabitha nodded, taking the rope he handed her. I can do that. As Thomas waded into the muddy creek, Tabitha spoke soothingly to the mother cow, keeping the rope ready but not threatening the animal. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. With considerable effort, Thomas freed the calf, lifting it from the mud and carrying it to solid ground. The mother immediately came to her offspring, nudging it with her nose as if checking for injuries. Thomas emerged from the creek, covered in mud but grinning triumphantly. "You did well," he said to Tabitha. She laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that surprised even her. "We both did." As they walked back to the house, Tabitha realized something had shifted between them. They had faced a challenge together and succeeded. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt significant. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Thomas reached for her hand. "I think it's time we discuss the wedding," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Tabitha felt a flutter of nervousness. "Yes, I suppose it is." "Unless you've changed your mind," he added quickly, his eyes searching hers. "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I haven't changed my mind." Thomas's smile was warm and genuine. "Then, if it suits you, we could speak to Reverend Grayson this Sunday after church." Tabitha nodded, her heart racing. She was going to marry this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness since her arrival. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something solid, something that could grow into love with time and care. The wedding took place on a bright December morning in Redding's small church. Tabitha wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Whitaker had helped her make, with tiny pearls sewn along the collar, a touch of elegance in their frontier setting. Thomas stood tall and proud beside her, his usually work-worn appearance transformed by a new suit and carefully combed hair. His eyes never left her face as they exchanged vows, his voice steady and sure when he promised to honor and cherish her all the days of their lives. The townspeople attended, curious about the mail-order bride who had come to marry one of their own. Tabitha felt their stares as she walked down the aisle, her limp more noticeable in her nervousness, but Thomas's hand was firm on her arm, his pace deliberately matched to hers. After the ceremony, there was a small reception at the town hall, with food contributed by the women of the community and music provided by a local fiddler. Thomas surprised Tabitha by asking her to dance, leading her to the center of the floor despite her protests. "I can't dance," she whispered, embarrassed. "Neither can I," he confessed with a grin. "But I thought we could sway a bit, get to know the feeling of being husband and wife." And so they did, moving slowly together as the fiddle played a gentle tune. Tabitha was acutely aware of Thomas's hand at her waist, of the solid strength of him as he supported her, making sure she didn't falter. Later, as they drove back to the ranch, their home now, Tabitha felt a sense of peace settle over her. The decision she had made months ago to leave everything familiar behind and journey west to marry a stranger had been the right one. The winter months brought new challenges and deeper understanding between them. The ranch required constant attention, even in the colder season. Cattle needed feeding, equipment needed repair, and the house itself demanded maintenance to withstand the winter storms. Tabitha proved herself more capable than even she had believed possible. Her limp didn't prevent her from managing the household efficiently, from helping with minor ranch tasks, or from beginning to teach reading and writing to the children of neighboring ranches who couldn't make the journey into town for formal schooling. Thomas watched her with growing admiration, and something else, a tenderness that made his eyes soften whenever they rested on her. Their marriage, which had begun as a practical arrangement, was evolving into something deeper, something neither had fully anticipated. They shared a bed now, and the initial awkwardness had given way to a gentle intimacy. Thomas was considerate, never pushing, allowing their physical relationship to develop at a pace that felt comfortable for both of them. One night, as snow fell outside their window, Tabitha found the courage to share the full story of her accident, not just the physical details she had included in her letter, but the emotional aftermath. How her fiancé in Boston had broken their engagement after her injury, claiming he couldn't be tied to a woman who would always be less than whole. How her own family had treated her injury as a tragedy that defined her entire existence. Thomas listened in silence, his hand holding hers, his thumb tracing comforting circles on her skin. When she finished, he brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "He was a fool," Thomas said simply, "and blind, not to see your worth beyond a physical limitation." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes. "I was afraid you would regret your choice," she admitted. "That one day you'd look at me and wish you'd chosen someone someone complete. Thomas sat up then, taking her face in his hands, his expression intense. You are complete, Tabitha. Every part of you, your mind, your heart, your spirit. The way you move through the world with grace despite the pain I know you must feel. You're the strongest person I've ever known. In that moment, something bloomed in Tabitha's heart, a feeling so powerful it took her breath away. It was more than gratitude, more than affection. It was love, pure and unexpected. She kissed him then, pouring all her newfound emotion into the gesture. Thomas responded with equal fervor, and for the first time, their physical union was not just an act of marriage, but an expression of genuine love. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the hills surrounding the ranch. The cattle grew fat on fresh grass, and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Thomas handling the livestock and Tabitha managing the finances with a shrewd eye that impressed even the banker in town. They had settled into a partnership that balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses. Thomas's quiet patience complemented Tabitha's more decisive nature. Her organizational skills brought order to his somewhat haphazard approach to record-keeping. Together, they faced each day's challenges as a team, growing stronger in their bond. But life in the West was never without its trials. In late April, as Thomas and two of his hands were moving cattle to a new pasture, a sudden storm blew in from the mountains. Lightning spooked the herd, causing a stampede that sent the men scrambling for safety. Tabitha was in the kitchen when one of the ranch hands, young Billy Cooper, rode in at a gallop, his face pale with urgency. "Mrs. Yeardley," he called as she hurried onto the porch. "There's been an accident. The boss is hurt. We need the wagon." Fear clutched at Tabitha's heart as she helped Billy hitch the wagon. "How bad is it?" she asked, climbing up beside him, despite his protests that she should stay behind. "His horse fell," Billy explained as they set off, "rolled right over him. He was conscious when I left, but in a bad way, madam." The journey to the pasture was the longest of Tabitha's life. When they arrived, she found Thomas lying on a makeshift bed of blankets, his face ashen with pain. His leg was clearly broken, the bone pushing against the skin in a way that made her stomach lurch. "Tabitha," he whispered as she knelt beside him, "you shouldn't have come." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice as she assessed his injuries. Besides the broken leg, he had cuts and bruises, and possibly broken ribs from the way he winced when he breathed. With the help of the ranch hands, they carefully moved Thomas into the wagon. Tabitha cradled his head in her lap for the bumpy ride back to the ranch, whispering reassurances and prayers in equal measure. Dr. Wilson, Redding's only physician, arrived several hours later, having been fetched by Billy. The diagnosis was, as Tabitha feared, a compound fracture of the leg, 3 broken ribs, and various contusions. The leg was the worst. It would need to be set, and even then, the doctor warned there might be permanent damage. "He might walk with a limp," Dr. Wilson told Tabitha privately after treating Thomas. "If infection sets in, it could be worse. We'll have to wait and see." The irony wasn't lost on either of them when Thomas regained full consciousness and was told the prognosis. He managed a weak smile despite the pain. "Now we'll match," he joked, squeezing Tabitha's hand. The weeks of recovery were difficult. Thomas was not a good patient, chafing at the confinement and worrying about the ranch. Tabitha took on more responsibilities, overseeing the ranch hands, making decisions about the cattle, all while caring for Thomas and maintaining the household. She was exhausted, but there was a strange satisfaction in proving to herself, as much as to others, that she was capable of managing it all. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of taking orders from a woman, especially one with a physical impairment, came to respect her determination and common sense. As Thomas began to heal, able to move around with crutches, their roles shifted again. He could advise on ranch matters from the porch or the kitchen table, while Tabitha became his legs, going where he couldn't, seeing to things that needed attention. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas voiced what had been on his mind. "You've done more than I had any right to expect," he said, "running the ranch, caring for me. I'm sorry for the burden." Tabitha turned to him surprised. "It's not a burden, Thomas. It's what we promised each other in sickness and in health, remember?" He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "When I first saw you at the station, with your limp, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Coming all this way to marry a stranger, starting a new life despite the challenges you faced." He took her hand. "Now I know I was right, but for reasons I couldn't have imagined then." Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so afraid you'd be disappointed," she confessed, "that you'd see me as broken." Thomas's laugh was gentle. "Broken? You're the strongest person on this ranch. You've kept everything going while I've been laid up. The hands respect you, the cattle are thriving, and somehow you've managed to keep me from going completely mad with frustration." He pulled her closer. "I think I fell in love with you that first day, when you were so determined to prove you didn't need help. But I've fallen more in love with you every day since, watching you face each challenge with grace and that stubborn chin of yours." Tabitha laughed through her tears. "My stubborn chin?" "It does this thing when you're determined," he said, touching her face tenderly. "It juts out just a bit, and I know whatever stands in your way doesn't stand a chance." By midsummer, Thomas was walking again, albeit with a noticeable limp that the doctor confirmed would likely be permanent. The pain in his leg was worst in the mornings or after a long day's work, something Tabitha understood all too well from her own experience. On the anniversary of her arrival in Reading, Thomas surprised her with a gift, a beautiful walking stick carved from polished oak with wildflowers burned into the wood. "I made it myself," he said, almost shyly. "I thought, well, we both might need a little support from time to time." Tabitha ran her fingers over the intricate designs. "It's beautiful," she said, "but you know, I find I need it less and less these days. Having someone who walks beside me, matching my pace, it makes the journey easier." Thomas smiled, pulling her into his arms. "We make a good team, don't we? Limping along together." "The best team," she agreed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. That fall, Tabitha discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with joy and trepidation. Pregnancy would be harder with her condition, and childbirth potentially dangerous. But Dr. Wilson assured them that many women with similar impairments had successfully borne children. Thomas was protective during the pregnancy, insisting on hiring additional help for the house and the ranch. Tabitha allowed it, recognizing that this wasn't about her capabilities, but about his love and concern. Their son, Timothy James Yeardley, was born on a bright spring morning in 1875 after a difficult but successful labor. He was a healthy, strong baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined expression. As Tabitha held her son for the first time, with Thomas sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a mail order, bride arriving with uncertainty and fear, to a wife, a rancher's partner, and now a mother. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered, his finger tracing their son's tiny features. "He is," Tabitha agreed. Then, with a smile, "and his legs look just fine." Thomas laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "I wouldn't care if they weren't," he said. "Look what we've accomplished together, limitations and all." As Timothy grew, so did the ranch. Thomas and Tabitha added more cattle, expanded their operations to include some crops, and built a larger house to accommodate their growing family. 2 years after Timothy's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Eleanor Grace, named after both their mothers. Tabitha did eventually become a teacher in Reading, starting a small school on their ranch for neighboring children, before the town built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as the teacher. Her limp was simply a part of who she was, neither hidden nor emphasized, just as Thomas's had become part of him. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they hosted a gathering for friends and neighbors, a celebration of the life they had built together. As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, Thomas pulled Tabitha away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice soft in the gathering dusk. "Answering my advertisement, coming west to marry a stranger?" Tabitha looked up at him, this man who had promised to walk slowly beside her always, and had kept that promise through a decade of joy and hardship, laughter and tears. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "It was the best decision I ever made." Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes deeper now, but still crinkling with warmth when he looked at her. "When I wrote that advertisement, I was looking for a practical partnership. I never expected to find my heart's match." "Nor I," Tabitha admitted. "But life has a way of giving us what we need, even when we don't know to ask for it." As they rejoined the celebration, moving at their own shared pace, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Two people with physical limitations who had found in each other not just acceptance, but true partnership and deep love. Their imperfections hadn't defined them, they had simply been part of the path they walked together. And as promised on that very first day, Thomas had always walked slowly beside her, matching his stride to hers, just as she had learned to match her strengths to his weaknesses. Together, they had built a life neither could have imagined alone, rich in love, family, and purpose. In the years that followed, the Yeardley Ranch became known throughout the region, not just for its fine cattle, but for the couple who ran it. The schoolteacher with a limp and the rancher who had once placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride and found instead the love of his life. Their story became something of a legend in Redding, a testament to the truth that the strongest bonds are forged not in perfection, but in the willingness to embrace each other's flaws and face life's challenges side by side, step by sometimes halting step, walking slowly together, always.